I stared at my reflection in the mirror, trying to find any hint of confidence in it. A wrinkled face, gray hair in a neat bun, and eyes full of doubt. At 67, I suddenly felt like a little girl facing a difficult choice. Except that at my age, every decision carries the weight of years, experience, and responsibility. Today, I was going to do something I had been thinking about for the last 6 months: sign over the house to my only daughter, Pamela. This house was more than just a structure of wood and brick. It was a repository of memories, a witness to my life with Herbert, the place where our daughter grew up. Are you sure, Beatrice? I asked myself aloud, clasping the pearl necklace my husband had given me for our 25th anniversary. Herbert would understand me. He always said we were working for Pamela's future. Every savings, every extra shift, every refusal to take a vacation, all so that one day our daughter would inherit the fruits of our labors. Only we both thought it would happen naturally when we were both gone. But fate had it differently. 4 years ago, a heart attack took Herbert, leaving me alone in a house that now seemed too big and empty. I sighed and picked up my purse. The papers were inside, neatly folded in a folder. Everything was ready to go. Pamela was to meet me at the notary's office at 10 o'clock. Our house had stood on quiet Maple Street in Salem for 30 years. We had bought it when Pamela was 12, giving all our savings for a down payment. Herbert winked at me then and said, "We have a real house now, Bea. A real house for a real family." I remember him and I painting the walls, changing the floors, organizing the garden. Every corner held the imprint of our hands, our dreams and hopes. This is the house where Pamela got ready for graduation, where she left for college, where she brought her future husband, Winston. This is where my grandchildren, Roger and Hazel, grew up. And now, I was going to give it all to them. It's the right thing to do, I told myself as I closed the door. The house should belong to the young. The notary's office was bright and spacious. Pamela was already waiting for me, elegant in her dark blue suit. Next to her sat Winston, impeccably dressed and confident as always. "Mom, you're late," Pamela said instead of greeting me, glancing at her watch. "I got here 5 minutes before the appointed time, dear," I replied, trying not to show that her tone had hurt me. "We're just very excited, Beatrice," Winston smiled, getting up to help me with my coat. "Such an important day for the whole family." The notary, Mr. Prescott, a middle-aged man with a neat beard, came out a few minutes later. I had known him as a young intern when Herbert and I were processing the purchase of the house. "Mrs. Woodruff, it's good to see you again." He shook my hand warmly. "All the documents are ready. We just need to check the details and sign." The next hour passed in formalities. Mr. Prescott read out the paragraphs of the deed of gift. I nodded. Pamela and Winston exchanged glances. For a moment, I caught myself thinking they looked like children waiting for Christmas presents, impatient and barely containing their excitement. "Now, Mrs. Woodruff, with this deed, you hereby convey the title to the house at 23 Maple Street to your daughter Pamela Reeves, free of charge. Do you understand the legal implications of this decision?" "Yes, I do." "Are you doing this voluntarily, without any coercion or pressure?" I held my breath for a moment. I remembered endless conversations with Pamela about how difficult it was for her to support her family, how she and Winston dreamed of more space for the children, how it would be wise if the house belonged to them legally. "Yes, it's my voluntary decision." The pen left an ink mark on the paper, a clear signature I'd practiced for years putting it on my students' school report cards. Beatrice Elaine Woodruff. I dotted it and felt a strange sense of relief. The decision had been made. There was no room for doubt. "Congratulations, Mrs. Reeves. You are now officially the owner of the house." Mr. Prescott handed a copy of the document to Pamela. She accepted it with the demure smile that had become her trademark in recent years. No elation, just a slight satisfaction, as if she had received what was rightfully hers. "Thank you, Mom," she said as we left the office. "It's a very responsible of you." Winston was more emotional. "Beatrice, you have no idea what this means to us." He hugged me, and I could smell his expensive cologne. "We've been wanting to renovate for so long. Now we can take out a loan against the house and turn it into a real family nest." "A family nest?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "But the house was already a family home." Sure, he agreed quickly, helping me into the car. I meant that now we could make it even better, worthy of our position. On the drive home, Pamela and Winston were talking animatedly about the plans for the transformation of the house, as if oblivious to my presence in the back seat. I stared out the window at the streets of Salem floating by and thought about Herbert. What would he say now? Would he approve of my decision, or would he think it was rash? And in your room, Mom, Pamela's voice brought me back to reality. We could make a nursery for Hazel. She needs more space now that she's become a teenager. In my room? I questioned, not sure I understood correctly. Yes, we thought you'd be more comfortable in the small guest room downstairs, Pamela continued casually. It's hard for you to climb stairs with your arthritis. I don't have arthritis, Pamela. You don't? I thought you did. Anyway, it's more practical. Wouldn't you agree? I couldn't find anything to say. Of course, a smaller room would have been enough for me alone, but my bedroom, it was where my bed was, where the pictures of my life hung, where there was a window overlooking the old maple tree we'd planted the year we moved in. We'll talk about this later, I finally said. The change began the very next day. Winston brought in an interior designer, a tall woman with a notepad, and the cold stare of a professional assessing a space. These walls need to come down, she said, pointing to the partition between the living room and dining room. Open space is the trend right now, and that fireplace, it's authentic, but it's taking up too much space. But Herbert and I built this fireplace ourselves, I countered. It works beautifully and creates atmosphere. The designer looked at me as if she'd just noticed my presence, then glanced questioningly at Winston. Mother, Pamela said softly, we appreciate your feelings, but the house needs modernizing. It's been 30 years. So the house is in excellent condition. Dad and I have always looked after it. But it looks outdated, Pamela said the word as if it were a mortal sin. That night I tried to remember when my girl, once joyful and loving, had turned into this cold woman. Maybe when she went to a prestigious college? Or when she married Winston, whose family had always prided itself on its standing in society? Or did it happen gradually, year after year, unnoticed by a mother's eye, wanting to see only the best in her child? A week later, the renovation of the living room began. Workers removed family photos from the walls, removed my crocheted pillows, put my books in boxes. I felt like a stranger in my home, more like a guest than a hostess. Grandma, where did that silver candlestick go? Hazel asked me one evening when we were sitting in the kitchen, the only place still untouched by the renovation. Your mom put it away, said it didn't fit in with the new decor. Hazel frowned. In her 16 years, she was a carbon copy of Pamela at the same age, the same face shape, the same expressive eyes. But unlike her mother, she seemed to have retained the ability to empathize. But you loved him. Daddy told me that great-grandpa brought it back from Europe. Yes, it was your grandfather's family heirloom. It's not fair, she mumbled, staring at her phone. Life is often unfair, sweetheart, I replied, stroking her hair. But we get through it. By the end of the month, I'd moved into a small room on the first floor, just like Pamela wanted. My old bedroom was completely devastated. New wallpaper, new furniture, even new floors. There was nothing to remind me that it had once been the room where I woke up every morning next to Herbert. Roger helped me move a few boxes of personal belongings. He was tall and strong in his 20s, with the soft features of his father's face, but without his arrogance. Grandma, can I ask you something? He said, arranging my books on a small shelf. Of course, dear. Why did you decide to give the house to Mom? I mean, you could have just bequeathed it. I sat down on the edge of the new uncomfortable bed and wondered how to explain this to a young man with his whole life ahead of him. It seemed like the right thing to do. Your parents wanted to be able to set up the house to their liking, and I just wanted to see you all enjoy yourselves while I was still here. Roger nodded, but there was a look of incomprehension in his eyes. But now it's like you're out of place. This is still my home, Roger. It just looks different now. But the truth was, I did feel out of place. Every day something changed. Familiar objects disappeared and new, unfamiliar ones appeared. Pamela and Winston asked my opinion less and less often, and more often made decisions without telling me. One evening, Pamela announced that she was hosting a dinner for Winston's co-workers and their wives. She asked me to help with the preparations, and I gladly agreed. Finally, a chance to feel useful. I baked my signature apple pie, a recipe that has been passed down in our family for generations. I spent all day on it, making sure the crust was perfectly golden and the filling was flavorful and juicy. When the guests gathered in the renovated dining room, where there was now a huge glass table instead of our old wooden one, I proudly brought out the pie. "Here's dessert," I smiled as I placed it on the table. "Oh, Mom," Pamela looked embarrassed. "We ordered professional cakes from that new French pastry shop, but thanks for the initiative." I stood with the cake in my hands, feeling everyone's eyes on me. One of the guests coughed. "Why don't we save it for breakfast?" Winston suggested with a strained smile. I nodded silently and took the pie into the kitchen. There, alone, I cut myself a slice and ate it, savoring every familiar flavor. Herbert always said my apple pie was the best he'd ever tasted. After dinner, as the guests dispersed around the living room with glasses of wine, I began clearing the table. One of the women, the wife of Winston's co-worker, helped me. "You have a lovely home, Mrs. Woodruff," she said, handing me the plates. "Thank you, but it's my daughter and her husband's house now," I replied. "Oh, I didn't know that. Did you move in with them?" "No, I signed the house over to my daughter. We live together." "That's so sweet of you. A lot of older people are so attached to their property." She sounded genuinely approving, but the word elderly people hurt my ears. Am I now just an old woman to be expected to give in and deny myself? When everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Pamela sat down next to me on the couch. She smelled of wine and expensive perfume. "It was a wonderful evening," she said. "It's very important for Winston to make a good impression on his colleagues. He's aiming for a promotion." "I'm glad it went well." Pamela was silent for a moment, then suddenly took my hand. "Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something." "I'm listening, dear." "You know, Winston and I were thinking, there's a new senior residence a few blocks from here. Sunny gardens, very modern, with medical care and all the amenities." I froze, not believing my ears. "You're suggesting I move into a nursing home?" "It's not a nursing home, Mom." Pamela rolled her eyes. "It's a residence for active seniors. There's a pool, a library, hobby groups. You won't be lonely." "I'm not lonely here with my family." "But you're alone all the time. Winston and I work. The kids are at school or with friends. And there you'll find people your own age, with common interests." I stared at my daughter in silence, trying to figure out when the gulf between us had gotten so deep. When did my child, whom I carried under my heart, to whom I gave my best, decide that his own mother was superfluous in his life? "I'll think about it," I said finally, not wanting to start a fight. "Of course you will," Pamela smiled, standing up. "By the way, Winston and I have decided to remodel the kitchen next week. You won't have to cook for a while, but that's no problem, is it?" She kissed me on the cheek and walked away, leaving me alone in the living room, which no longer resembled the house where I'd lived 30 years of my life. I stared at my reflection in the small bathroom mirror. Sunday morning was unusually clear and serene. I decided to go to church early, as I had done every Sunday for the past 30 years. Pamela and Winston usually slept in until late on weekend mornings, and then went to lunch at the country club where my son-in-law had business ties. I put on my favorite blue dress and a string of pearls, a gift from Herbert for our 20th anniversary. In my purse, I put a tattered Bible with bookmarks and notes accumulated over the decades. "I'm off to church," I said softly, peering into Hazel's room, but her granddaughter mumbled something in her sleep and rolled over onto her other side. The day promised to be warm, so I decided to walk. St. Thomas's Church was only a 15-minute walk from our house. I knew every house, every tree on this route. Here, in this quiet neighborhood of Salem, I had lived most of my adult life. The service was inspiring. Pastor Green spoke about patience and forgiveness, and the importance of accepting change with an open heart. After the service, I stayed late to talk to Mrs. Eldridge, a longtime friend of mine. We taught together at Salem Elementary School for almost 20 years. "How are you doing, Beatrice?" she asked with genuine concern. "I hear you're doing a lot of remodeling at your house." "Yes, Pamela and Winston decided to redecorate," I answered, trying to sound carefree. "You know, modern trends, open spaces and all that. What do you think of the changes?" Honestly, sometimes I feel like a stranger in my own home, but that's their right. They're young. They'll be living in this house for years to come. But it's your house too, she said softly. Not anymore, Martha. I signed it over to Pamela a month ago. Mrs. Eldridge raised her eyebrows in surprise. Are you sure that was a wise decision? It seemed right at the time, I shrugged. Herbert had always wanted Pamela to have the house. Take care of yourself, Beatrice. She hugged me tightly goodbye. And remember that my door is always open to you. I returned home with a light heart. Talking to my friends and praying always gave me strength. I even began to think that maybe I should really consider that senior residence Pamela had mentioned. But all my thoughts instantly evaporated when I turned onto Maple Street and saw our house. Or rather, what was waiting for me in front of it. There were several cardboard boxes and 3 suitcases in the driveway. My suitcases. Next to them were bags, obviously filled with stuff. I quickened my step, not believing my eyes. As I got closer, I saw that the boxes were labeled in Pamela's neat handwriting: books, photo albums, winter clothes. The front door opened and Winston appeared on the doorstep. He was dressed in his favorite Sunday cardigan and looked completely unperturbed, as if what was happening was the most ordinary thing in the world. Ah, Beatrice, you're back, he said, as if we'd bumped into each other at the supermarket. Good. We're just finishing up with your things. What's going on, Winston? My voice shook, but I tried to keep my dignity. Why is my stuff outside? He took a few steps toward me, keeping the expression of professional courtesy on his face that he usually used when dealing with customers. Beatrice, Pamela, and I have discussed the situation at length and have come to the conclusion that everyone would be better off if you started living on your own. You deserve your space, your freedom. My space? I was so stunned I could barely find the words. But this is my home, Winston. I've lived here for 30 years. Technically, it's not your home anymore, he said softly, but I could hear the steel in his voice. You transferred ownership to Pamela, remember? And we're very grateful for that generous gesture. But now that we've started a major kitchen renovation, it would be extremely inconvenient to... Where's Pamela? I interrupted him, looking around. I want to talk to my daughter. She's at the mall with the kids. The new school year's coming up. We need to buy school supplies. He shrugged. She told me to tell you that it's a mutual decision. She'll call you later. I stood in the middle of the lawn I'd planted years ago and felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. How could this have happened? How could my own daughter kick me out of the house without even having the courage to say it to my face? I need to sit down, I mumbled, heading toward the garden bench. Of course, Winston nodded. I've ordered a cab for you. It'll be here in 10 minutes. We paid for a week's stay at the Pine Hotel on Washington Street. That will give you time to find a permanent place to live. He handed me an envelope that I assumed contained money and some papers. I didn't take it. And my personal belongings? Photographs, letters, memorabilia from Herbert? It's all here in boxes, he waved his hand. Pamela was very careful to collect your things. She didn't miss a thing. 30 years of life in a few cardboard boxes. I grinned bitterly. How efficient of her. Winston looked slightly embarrassed, but quickly pulled himself together. Look, Beatrice, I realize this isn't an easy moment for you. But sometimes you have to move on. You said yourself that you've been feeling out of place in the house lately. Now you'll have the opportunity to customize the space to your liking. I didn't say that, I objected, but Winston smiled dutifully. Anyway, the cab will be here soon. I'll help you load your things. My phone rang. Pamela's name popped up on the screen. I swallowed hard and answered it. Mom? My daughter's voice sounded businesslike and distant. Did Winston explain the situation to you? Did he? I could barely hold back my tears. Pamela, how could you do this? Why didn't you tell me in person? We've already talked about it, Mom. She sounded annoyed. Remember when I told you about Sunny Gardens? You said you'd think about it. I didn't think you'd put me out on the street before I made a decision. No one's kicking you out, she said now, as if she were explaining something to a small child. We paid for your hotel, gave you time to find a new place to live. You'll be better off on your own, believe me. Better? Or more convenient for you? Mom, don't be so dramatic, please. This decision has been made in the best interest of everyone. You said yourself that the renovations were tiring. Now you can have a break from all the noise and dust. That's when the cab pulled up. Winston had already started loading boxes into the trunk. I have to go, I said. The cab was here. Good. Pamela sounded relieved. Call me when you're settled in. And don't forget to look at the Sunny Gardens brochure. It's in the blue folder among your papers. I hung up without saying goodbye. The feeling of unreality never left me. I felt like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. So unbelievable it all seemed. The cab driver, an elderly man with a gray mustache, helped Winston load the last of his suitcases and looked at me sympathetically. To the Pine Hotel, ma'am? I nodded, unable to utter a word. I took one last look at the house where I'd lived half my life and got into the car. Winston leaned against the open window. Good day, Beatrice. Don't forget, the first week at the hotel is already paid for. That's very generous of you, I replied dryly, considering you just got a house worth several $100,000. I didn't shed a tear on the way back to the hotel. There was a devastating silence inside, as if all emotion had been turned off at once. I mechanically noted familiar streets, stores, parks. See, Salem had been my home for so long that every corner of it held a piece of my memories. The Pine Hotel was a decent 3-story Victorian-style building with a well-kept garden. I'd been here before. Herbert and I sometimes went to the local restaurant for dinner on special occasions. Check-in was quick. The receptionist, a young woman with a friendly smile, told me that a standard room overlooking the garden had been booked for a week, all paid for. The room was small but clean and cozy. Double bed, desk, armchair by the window, TV on the wall. In the bathroom, a set of towels and toiletries, nothing personal, nothing familiar. When the porter set my suitcases and boxes down and left, I finally allowed myself to sit on the edge of the bed and burst into tears. The tears I had been holding back all this time came in floods. I cried for my lost home, for my daughter's betrayal, for Herbert not being there to support me in this difficult moment. I don't know how long I spent in this state. When the tears finally dried up, it was starting to get dark outside the window. I felt devastated but strangely cleansed. It was as if some of the pain had gone with those tears. I forced myself to get up, wash my face, and start unpacking. Methodically, one by one, I opened the boxes, inspecting their contents. Pamela had indeed been very thorough. All my personal belongings were here, neatly folded and packed. Photo albums, letters, books, clothes, even my cooking records, and the collection of porcelain figurines I'd collected all my life. In one of the boxes, I found an old framed photograph, Herbert and I on the day we bought the house on Maple Street. We are standing in front of the porch, young and happy, full of hopes and plans. Herbert has his arm around my shoulders and I'm holding a bunch of keys. Our first house of our own. What would you say now, Herbert? I whispered, running my finger over his smiling face. How could we have made such a mistake in raising our daughter? I set the photograph on the bedside table and continued sorting through my things. In the blue folder, just as Pamela had said, was a glossy Sunny Gardens brochure. I flipped through it without much interest. The envelope Winston held out to me, which I eventually took, contained cash, $2,000, and a short note from Pamela. Mom, I hope you realize that this decision is for the best for all of us. Call me when you're ready to discuss your future housing options. Love, Pamela. Love. I grinned bitterly. What did she know about love? About the unconditional, selfless parental love that Herbert and I had felt for her entire life? The next few days were spent looking for a new place to live. I called real estate agents, looked at newspaper ads, visited apartments and rooms. My teacher's pension fund gave me some financial stability, but housing prices in Salem were high, especially in good neighborhoods. On my third day at the hotel, I unexpectedly ran into Mrs. Eldridge in the lobby. Beatrice, what are you doing here? I told her everything. About the boxes in the driveway, about Pamela's cold call, about finding a new place to live. She listened with growing indignation. It's just outrageous, after all you've done for them. That's life, Martha, I shrugged, surprised at my own calmness. Children grow up and forget what they owe their parents. You've always been strong, Beatrice. She hugged me tightly. If you need anything at all, just call. That night, I felt truly hungry for the first time in days. I went down to the hotel restaurant and ordered a full dinner with a glass of white wine. Sitting at the window overlooking the evening garden, I pondered the future. About how perhaps there was a positive side to this betrayal, an opportunity for a fresh start. The week at the Pine Hotel was coming to an end. I sat at a small table by the window, looking through the newspaper with the rental ads. I used a red pencil to mark the appropriate options. There weren't many of them. Salem had always been an expensive town, and on my teacher's pension, I could only count on something very modest. An ad in the corner of the page caught my eye. Cozy studio apartment for rent in a Victorian house. Quiet neighborhood, close to the center, for one person. The listed price was a little higher than what I planned to spend on lodging, but the address attracted me. Cherry Street. I knew well this quiet neighborhood with beautiful old trees. I called the number and a woman's voice with a slight accent gave me an appointment for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I decided not to waste any time and went to the address beforehand to look around. Cherry Street was exactly as I remembered it. Neat turn-of-the-century houses, well-tended front gardens, red brick sidewalks. Number 22 was a 3-story red brick mansion with white shutters and a small turret on the side. A typical example of the Victorian architecture for which Salem was so famous. The gate creaked as I entered the yard. There was an old woman sitting on the porch in a rocking chair reading a book. When she saw me, she put down her reading and looked at me carefully over her glasses. "Are you Mrs. Woodruff?" she asked with a slight German accent. "Yes, I came from the apartment ad," I answered as I climbed the porch steps. "Agnes Klein," the woman introduced herself, extending her hand. "We spoke on the phone. You're early." "I hope that's not a problem?" I wanted to look around the neighborhood a bit. Agnes smiled and her wrinkled face lit up with a kind of inner light. "No problem at all. I like punctual people. Come on, I'll show you the apartment." We entered a cool wood-paneled hallway with an ancient staircase leading to the upper floors. "This used to be a private house," Agnes explained, noticing my admiring gaze. "After my husband died, I divided it into 3 apartments. I live on the first floor. A young couple, musicians, live on the first floor, and the apartment I rent is in the attic." We climbed the creaky stairs to the 3rd floor. Agnes, despite her age, moved easily and confidently. She unlocked the door at the end of the corridor and let me in. The apartment was brighter and more spacious than I had expected. The large windows looked out onto the street and the garden behind the house. There wasn't much furniture, a bed, a chest of drawers, a table, a couple of chairs, and bookshelves against the wall, but it was all good, old, and historic. "This used to be my daughter's room," Agnes said, running her hand along the wooden back of the chair. "She left for Europe many years ago. Sometimes she comes to visit, but she lives there permanently." I walked slowly around the room, feeling myself liking it more and more. The small kitchen was separated from the main space by an archway, and the bathroom still had the old cast-iron bathtub on lion's feet. "It's very cozy here," I said sincerely. "You're a retired teacher, right?" Agnes asked when we got back to the main room. "Yes, I taught elementary school for 35 years. "I thought so," she nodded. "You have the eyes of a teacher, attentive, kind, but stern. I was a librarian at the university. I love people connected with books and knowledge." We talked some more, discussing the terms of the lease. Agnes quoted a price a little lower than the one listed in the ad, which pleasantly surprised me. "A good price for a good person," she explained, noticing my surprise. "It is more important to me that a decent person lives here than to get extra money." By the evening of the same day, I had signed the lease and put down a deposit. The move was scheduled for the next day. I returned to the hotel with a sense of relief and even some excitement. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making my own decisions, organizing my life as I saw fit, not adrift as I had been for the last few years after Herbert's death. In the morning, I packed my bags, paid for an extra day's lodging, and hailed a cab to my new home. By noon, I was organizing my few belongings into shelves and drawers in the Cherry Street apartment. Agnes came up to help me, bringing a freshly baked cake and a thermos of coffee. "You have to celebrate," she said, setting the cups on the table. "Even if you're moving into a rented place." We sat by the window, drinking coffee and cake and talking like old acquaintances. Agnes talked about the house, the neighborhood, the neighbors. Nate and Lydia Foster live on the second floor, she said. He plays violin in the city orchestra, she plays cello. Sometimes they rehearse at home, but always with advance notice and never late at night. Wonderful young people. I listened and nodded and thought about how strangely my life had turned. A week ago, I had my own house, even if it was registered to my daughter, my own room, my own place in the family hierarchy. Now I'm sitting in someone else's apartment, drinking coffee with a woman I met only yesterday, and for some reason I feel lighter than I have in the last year surrounded by my relatives. The next few days were spent in the hassle of setting up the new place. I bought new curtains, a couple of cushions for the chair, a few pots of flowers, little touches that made the space more personal, more me. Every morning I woke up as the sun rose, made tea and sat by the window, watching the street awaken. The letter carrier on his bicycle delivering the morning mail, school children with backpacks rushing to class, a woman in the house across the street walking a small dog, ordinary life on an ordinary street. But for me, it was a new beginning, a new page. On the third day after moving in, I decided to explore the neighborhood. I grabbed my bag and went for a walk around the neighborhood. Cherry Street transitioned smoothly into a small square with a fountain, surrounded by stores, cafes, and a small library. I stopped in front of the library, attracted by the announcement on the door. Volunteers needed for children's readings. Almost without thinking, I pushed open the door and walked in. Inside smelled of books, wood polish, and a little bit of coffee. The young woman behind the counter looked up from her computer and smiled at me. "Welcome to the Cherry Hill Library. What can I do for you?" "I'm here about the volunteer ad," I said, stepping closer. "I'm a former elementary school teacher who recently moved to the neighborhood." The woman glowed. "Oh, that's wonderful. We're just looking for someone with experience working with children. Our regular reader, Mrs. Parker, went to visit her daughter in Florida for a couple of months, and the kids love our Saturday readings so much." She introduced herself as Olivia Chen, head librarian, and led me into a small room at the back of the library where the children's activities were held. The colorful cushions on the floor, the low bookshelves, the children's drawings on the walls all looked cozy and familiar. "The readings are every Saturday at 11 in the morning," Olivia explained. "Usually 5 to 15 children of different ages come. You pick a book, read it to them for half an hour, and then there's a short discussion or creative activity about the book. Nothing too complicated." That sounds wonderful. I felt a warm feeling inside at the thought of working with children again. "I could start this Saturday." "Great!" Olivia clapped her hands together. "Then come back at 10 and we'll get everything ready." As I left the library, I caught myself smiling. Volunteering at the library was exactly what I needed right now. An opportunity to be useful, to share my knowledge, to stay in contact with the children. I continued my walk and found a small supermarket nearby where I could buy groceries, a pharmacy, and a cozy cafe with a terrace. Everything I needed for life was within walking distance, which was very convenient. Returning home, I met a young couple coming out of our house. A tall man with long hair and a ponytail carried a violin case, and a frail woman with a short haircut rolled a cello behind her in a case on wheels. "You must be our new neighbor," the woman smiled. "Agnes has told me about you. I'm Lydia, and this is Nate." "Beatrice Woodruff." I shook her outstretched hand. "It's so nice to meet you. If you don't mind our music, we'll definitely be friends," Nate winked. "I love classical music," I replied sincerely, "and I'm sure your playing will brighten my days." We chatted for a few more minutes, and I learned that they'd been living here for 3 years, loving the house and Agnes, whom they call our German grandmother. "She's strict but fair," Lydia said, "and she bakes the best strudel in Salem." "I've already tasted her pie," I nodded. "It's really delicious." When the Fosters left, I went up to my apartment feeling like I was starting to grow into this place, to become part of the little community of Cherry Street. In the evening, I decided to start keeping a journal. I bought a beautiful hardcover notebook from the bookstore next to the library and sat by the window with a cup of tea. "Today is the 3rd day of my new life," I wrote on the first page. "It's strange to think that at 67 you have to start all over again, but maybe that's the beauty of it. Freedom from the past, from expectations, from the family roles we've been playing for years. I wrote for a long time, pouring out all the thoughts and feelings that had accumulated over the past few days. About Pamela and Winston's betrayal, the mixed feelings of bitterness and relief, about new acquaintances and plans for the future. Maybe this sudden change is exactly what I needed, I pondered in the pages of my diary. For the past few years, I had felt increasingly invisible, unwanted in the house. Pamela and Winston were living their own lives, the grandchildren grown and distant. I was a ghost in my own home. Now, at least, I am master of my own destiny. As I closed the journal, I felt strangely relieved, as if I had spoken to an old friend. I decided that this would become my evening habit, to write down the events and thoughts of the day, to analyze what had happened, to plan for the future. The next morning brought an unexpected surprise. When I went downstairs to check the mailbox, Agnes called out to me from her apartment. "Beatrice, a young man came to see you," she said, looking out of the door. "Very polite. He introduced himself as your grandson. He said he would come back later." My heart sank. "Roger? But how did he know my address?" "Thank you, Agnes. I didn't know he was coming to see me." "I didn't invite him in because you weren't home," she explained. "I hope that's right?" "Absolutely," I assured her. "You did the right thing." When I got back to the apartment, I felt mixed emotions. On the one hand, I was glad Roger had found me and hadn't forgotten about my grandmother. On the other, I was worried about what might have brought him here. Would Pamela and Winston know of his visit? What would I tell him about my new life? Before I could think of answers to these questions, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped again. I went downstairs and saw Roger shuffling from foot to foot on the porch. "Grandma!" He stepped forward and gave me a big hug. "I'm so glad I found you." "Roger, honey," I hugged him back, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "How did you know where I lived?" "Through Mrs. Eldridge," he explained, following me up the stairs. "Do you remember talking to her at the hotel? She told me you'd found an apartment on Cherry Street. I went door to door until I found you." In my apartment, Roger looked around with undisguised curiosity. "This place is cool, Grandma. It's so, vintage style." "Thank you," I smiled, sitting him down at the table. "Would you like some tea or maybe a Coke? I bought one just for you." "A Coke, please." He relaxed and smiled back. I took a can of Coke out of the small refrigerator and set it in front of my grandson, along with a plate of cookies. He looked a little awkward, like he didn't know where to start the conversation. "How are you, Grandma?" he finally asked. "Are you all right here?" "Yes, honey, I'm fine." I sat down across from him. "It's quiet, it's peaceful, the neighbors are nice. And I even found something to read to the kids at the local library on Saturdays." "That's great." He twirled a can of Coke in his hands. "Listen, Grandma, I wanted to apologize for my parents. What they did to you, it's not right." "It wasn't your fault, Roger," I said softly. "It was your parents' decision, not yours." "But still," he shook his head stubbornly. "I should have done something, told them." "Do you know what they're doing with the house?" "No," I tensed. "What is it?" "They're completely remodeling it." Roger looked indignant. "Dad hired some fancy designer. They're tearing down walls, changing everything. He says the house has to match their new status. Dad is counting on a promotion at his firm, and they're already planning parties for his coworkers and bosses." I listened, feeling strangely numb. The house that Herbert and I had built and furnished with so much love was now being remodeled at Winston's whim to impress his coworkers? "What does your mom think?" I asked, trying to remain calm. "She's totally supportive of Dad," Roger shrugged. "You know my mom, she always cared what other people thought, but all she talks about now is how they're going to have guests, dinner parties." "I understand." I nodded, though I didn't really understand. I didn't understand how my daughter, whom Herbert and I had raised in modesty and respect for labor, could have changed so much. Or maybe she had always been like this, and I just didn't want to see it. "They're even changing your garden, Grandma," Roger continued. "Your roses that you loved so much. Father said they were old-fashioned and hired a landscaper to do something more modern. It was painful. Roses were my special pride. my comfort after Herbert died. I had tended them with such love. Well, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, it's their home now and they can do what they like with it. But that's not fair, Roger exclaimed. You have put your soul into this house. Life is rarely fair, darling. I reached out and squeezed his hand. But we learn to accept the things we can't change and move on. We talked for a long time. Roger talked about college, about his plans for the future, about how Hazel missed me but was afraid to admit it to her parents. She wanted to come with me, but she was afraid her parents would find out, he explained. They told us that you decided to live on your own, that you would be better off without the noise and bustle of a big family. But Hazel doesn't believe it. She cried when she found out you weren't home anymore. My heart ached. Hazel, my little granddaughter, has always been a sensitive girl, despite her ostensible aloofness. Tell her I miss her very much, I said, and that I'd be happy to see her here any time. As Roger left, I gave him my new address and phone number, written down on a piece of paper. For Hazel, I explained. Let her know where to find me if she wants me. He nodded and gave me a big hug goodbye. I'll visit you, Grandma, he promised, and I won't tell my parents if you don't want me to. As you see fit, sweetheart, I replied. I don't keep secrets, but I don't impose. Your parents will know where to find me if they want me. After Roger left, I sat at the window for a long time, looking out at the street and thinking about our conversation. The house is rebuilt, the garden is changed, the past is erased. It was painful, but, in a strange way, also liberating. It was as if the last threads that bound me to the past were being cut one by one, allowing me to move forward without the weight of memories. In the evening, I opened my journal again and wrote down my thoughts about the encounter, the feelings it had evoked, and how strange it was to realize that the life you'd spent decades building could be so easily rewritten by other people. But my story continues, I wrote at the end, and now I'm writing it myself. The next 2 weeks passed in establishing new routines, new habits, new little rituals that make life predictable and cozy. Morning tea by the window, a walk to the library where I started helping with cataloging books in addition to Saturday readings, lunch at a small cafe on the square where I was already known by name, evening conversations with Agnes or the foster spouses, journal entries before going to bed. On Wednesday, when I came home from shopping, I found a brightly colored envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a card with a picture of a kitten holding a bouquet of flowers and the words, "Miss you." Inside, in uneven teenage handwriting, was written, "Dear Grandma, Roger gave me your address. Don't tell your parents I wrote to you, okay? They think it's better for everyone if we see each other less often. But I miss you. Your stories, your cookies, the way you always listened to me, even when everyone else was too busy. The house is noisy with workmen all the time now. I don't like what they're doing to our house. It's starting to look like a picture from a magazine. Beautiful, but not real. I hid your porcelain statue of the ballerina you loved. Mom wanted to throw it away, said it didn't fit in with the new decor. It's safe with me. I'll try to visit you when I can sneak away. Roger said you have a very nice apartment. Love, your Hazel." I clutched the card to my chest, feeling my eyes fill with tears. My little Hazel, so sensitive, so loyal. In the midst of all the chaos and betrayal, it was a thread of hope, a thread of true, selfless love. That same night I wrote back, a long letter telling her about my new life, about the library, about my neighbors, about learning to be independent. I tried to write positively, without bitterness or accusations against her parents. Hazel didn't have to feel like she was between two fires, choosing between her parents and her grandmother. I love you, my dear granddaughter, I wrote at the end, and I will always be there for you when you need me. Your support means more to me than you can imagine. Thank you for not forgetting your old grandmother. I decided not to mail the letter, but to deliver it through Roger the next time we met. It would be safer for Hazel that way. As I went to bed, I thought about how strange things had turned out. I'd lost my home and my daughter, but I think I was just now starting to really find myself, and perhaps a real connection with my grandchildren, based not on obligations and family roles, but on genuine affection and mutual respect. 3 months flew by unnoticed. October painted the trees of Salem in gold and purple colors, turning Cherry Street into a picturesque avenue. I had fully settled into my new life. My little apartment under the roof became a real home, cozy, filled with books, plants, and the quiet I had missed so much in my last years on Maple Street. Saturday readings at the library became a regular part of my schedule. The children looked forward to our meetings, and I prepared for them with the same enthusiasm I'd once had for my classes. Olivia even offered me a small, paid job 3 days a week for 4 hours to help with cataloging and reader service. It was perfect for me, an extra income, a fun thing to do, and socializing with people. Roger visited me almost every week. Sometimes he came with Hazel, who made elaborate excuses for my parents, activities with friends, extra classes, school projects. Those visits were a real outlet. We baked cookies, played board games, just talked about everything in the world. No tension, no feeling like we were playing prescribed roles. Just grandma and grandkids who genuinely love each other. I only learned about Pamela and Winston from the occasional mention of the children. They were continuing a massive home renovation, going into more debt than they had originally planned, but they were enthusiastic. Winston had gotten his long-awaited promotion, and Pamela had thrown a huge party for the occasion. Life went on, and they seemed oblivious to my existence. It didn't hurt me as much as it used to. The journal I kept every night helped me sort out my feelings, accept the situation, and move on. I learned to value my independence and discovered new sides of myself that I hadn't realized I had. It turned out that at 67, life can be filled with new opportunities and discoveries. That morning, October 23rd, I sat in a small cafe on the square, sipping my morning coffee and perusing the local newspaper. It had become another of my rituals to start the day with a cup of coffee and the news of Salem. The cafe owner, an elderly Italian man named Marco, already knew my order and always reserved a corner table by the window for me. Flipping through the pages, I came across a small note in the incident section. The headline read, "Major fire at apartment building on Maple Street." My heart skipped a beat. Last night, about 10 p.m., there was a fire at a private residence at 23 Maple Street. According to preliminary reports from the fire department, the cause of the fire was faulty electrical wiring, probably related to recent renovation work. By the time firefighters arrived, the fire had consumed a significant portion of the second floor. Thanks to the prompt actions of the fire brigade, there were no casualties, but the house was seriously damaged. The family living in the house is temporarily accommodated in a hotel. I reread the note 3 times, not believing my eyes. My house was on fire. The house that Herbert and I had bought 30 years ago, where Pamela had grown up, where I had spent the best years of my life. And the cause was the very renovations that Pamela and Winston were so proud of. The irony of fate was too obvious to ignore. I felt a strange mixture of emotions, shock, concern, but also something akin to bitter satisfaction. Not that I wished for this outcome, but there was something of retribution in it, of a just ending to a story of greed and ingratitude. "Is everything all right, Signora Beatrice?" Marco's voice brought me back to reality. "You seem upset." "My former house burned down," I replied, pointing to the note. "The one I gave to my daughter a few months ago." "Madonna mia!" he exclaimed, crossing himself. "I hope no one was hurt?" "No, everyone's fine." I folded the paper. "I'm sorry, Marco, I have to go." He nodded understandingly, and I left the money on the table and hurried out the door. I needed time to process the news, to decide how to react. Should I call Pamela, offer to help, or wait for her to contact me herself, if she saw fit? I wandered through the fall streets of Salem, absorbed in my thoughts. People passed by. Fallen leaves rustled under my feet, but I barely noticed the world around me. Images of the burning house, of Pamela and the children's frightened faces, of the sirens of the fire trucks were in my head. When I got home, the first thing I did was call Roger. He didn't answer the phone for a long time, and I was about to hang up when I heard his voice on the other end, tired and tense. "Grandma, you know already?" "I just read it in the paper," I answered. "Are you all right? No one was hurt?" "Physically, we're all okay," he sighed. "But the house, you should have seen what was left of it. The whole second floor burned out, the first floor flooded. We're lucky we were all downstairs when the fire started. Hazel was the first to smell the smoke." "Thank God you made it out." I felt a lump come up in my throat. It wasn't just a house, it was a part of my life. Where are you now? At the Pine Hotel, Roger answered, and I couldn't help but notice the irony. The same hotel where Pamela and Winston had sent me 3 months ago. The insurance company had paid for our rooms for a week while they assessed the damage. And then what? I don't know, Grandma. His voice sounded confused. Dad's on the verge of a nervous breakdown. It turns out he hired some shady crew to do the repairs, who charged less money, but apparently did a bad job. Insurance probably wouldn't cover half the damage because of that. I thought about how Herbert always insisted on quality materials and trusted professionals. Saving on safety is the most expensive savings, he used to say. Winston clearly didn't share that principle. And Mom? How's she doing? Shocked. Roger lowered his voice as if he was afraid of being overheard. She wouldn't tell me, but I heard her calling Sunny Gardens, that senior residence they told you about. Asked if they had any apartments available for a family of 4. Can you believe it? They kicked you out to make you more comfortable there, and now they're ready to move in themselves. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Sometimes life teaches you lessons you can't think of on purpose. Grandma, I have to go, Roger said suddenly. My parents are back. I'll call you later, okay? Sure, honey. Take care of yourself. I hung up the phone and sat in the chair by the window, staring out at the street for a long time, pondering the vicissitudes of fate. My home, which I had so painfully left behind, now lay in ruins. The family that had so unceremoniously kicked me out the door was themselves homeless. Was it fate? Karma? Or just a coincidence? All day I was on pins and needles waiting for a call from Pamela, but the phone was silent. I tried to occupy myself with things. I went through my books, baked a pie, even started knitting, which I'd abandoned months ago. But my thoughts kept returning to the burning house, to Pamela, to the children who were homeless. In the evening, the doorbell rang. I went downstairs and saw through the glass pane the silhouette of a woman so similar to my own. The same shoulders, the same head planting. Pamela. Opening the door, I barely recognized my daughter. Usually impeccably dressed and coiffed, she now looked haggard. Her hair was in a sloppy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes, and not a trace of makeup on her face. Mom, she said the word as if she'd forgotten what it sounded like and was now tasting it. Can I come in? I stepped back silently, letting her into the house. Agnes looked out of her apartment, gave Pamela an appraising glance, and looked at me meaningfully. I nodded slightly, letting her know that everything was okay. We walked up to my apartment in complete silence. When the door closed behind us, Pamela finally spoke. It's cozy. Thank you. I gestured for her to sit down. Tea, coffee? Water, if I may. She sank down on the edge of the chair, as if she was afraid of taking up too much space. I poured her a glass of water and sat across from her, waiting for her to collect her thoughts. Pamela took a few sips, then set the glass on the table and looked up at me. You probably already know about the fire. Yeah, I read it in the paper. Roger called, said you were all safe. It's a miracle we made it out. She ran her hand over her face. It all happened so fast. 1 minute and the whole house was on fire. I was silent, giving her a chance to speak. Pamela nervously tugged at the sleeve of her sweater, obviously searching for words. Mom, I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything after everything that's happened, but I have no one else to turn to. What's wrong, Pamela? I asked, though I had already guessed the purpose of her visit. We don't have a place to stay, she said in one breath, as if she was afraid she'd lose her courage. The hotel insurance expires in 4 days. The insurance company refuses to fully cover the damage because of the irregularities in the repairs. Winston and I spent our entire savings on these repairs. We have nothing left. I looked at my daughter and saw not the self-assured woman who 3 months ago coldly told me on the phone that I would be better off on my own, but a frightened girl who had stumbled and now didn't know how to get out of the hole she had dug herself. What exactly do you want from me, Pamela? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She stammered, then straightened up as if making a difficult decision. We were wondering if we could stay with you, just for a little while, just until we figure out a place to live. Winston's already contacted the contractors and they say it'll take 3 to 6 months to rebuild, but you can't stay in a hotel that long, I finished for her. Yes, she nodded without looking up. It's too expensive. And the kids need a stable place, especially Hazel. She's really worried about all this. I stood up and walked over to the window. Outside the window, yellow leaves were falling slowly, swirling in the breeze. My thoughts were swirling as well, contradictory and complicated. On the one hand, this was my daughter, my flesh and blood, the mother of my grandchildren. They were in trouble, and how could I refuse to help them? On the other hand, the wound of their betrayal had not yet fully healed. They threw me out of my own home without hesitation when it suited them. Should I forget that so easily? The apartment is small, I said finally, turning to Pamela. Just one room, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. It would be very cramped for the four of you. We understand, she said hastily. We're prepared for the inconvenience. We can sleep on the floor, on cots. I haven't finished, I interrupted her gently. I'm not saying no to you, Pamela. I just want you to understand reality. This isn't a mansion on Maple Street. This is a small apartment under the roof of an old house. It has its own rules, its own rhythm of life. Agnes, the landlady, is very particular about silence and order. The family downstairs are musicians. They sometimes rehearse during the day. It's a different life from what you're used to. We'll adjust, she said, a note of desperation in her voice. We don't have a choice, Mom. I looked at my daughter and thought about how strange life can be sometimes. Not so long ago, she was the one dictating my living conditions in my own home, and now she was asking for shelter in my tiny apartment. Pamela, I said after a long pause, I can't make a decision right now. I need to think about it and talk to Agnes. It's her house, and she has to be okay with new tenants, even temporary ones. Of course. Pamela looked disappointed but nodded. I understand. When can you give me an answer? Tomorrow, I answered. Come back at the same time tomorrow and I'll tell you my decision. She stood up, pulling on a sweater that clearly wasn't her usual expensive clothing, probably something bought hastily after the fire. Thank you for at least listening, she said quietly. A lot of people in your shoes would have just slammed the door. I'm not a lot of people, Pamela. I'm your mother. She nodded, and something like remorse flashed in her eyes for a moment. But maybe I just wanted to see it. After walking my daughter to the door, I went back into the apartment and sank heavily into the chair. My thoughts swarmed in my head, clashing and contradicting each other. What should I do? What does my heart tell me and what does my mind tell me? I pulled out my journal and began to write, pouring all my doubts and fears onto the paper. Pamela and Winston threw me out of my home without hesitation when it suited them. Now they are asking for my help, finding themselves in trouble. Part of me wants to say no to them, to show them what it's like to find myself homeless, without a roof over my head, without the support of loved ones. But another part of me reminds them that they are my family, and that it's not just about them, but about Roger and Hazel, my grandchildren, who are innocent. I wrote for a long time, page after page, until it was finally dark outside the window. When I finally put down my pen, I realized that there was no solution, only a heaviness in my chest and a tension headache. I went downstairs to Agnes's room. Despite the late hour, the light in her apartment was still on. She opened the door at the first knock, as if she'd been expecting me. Chamomile tea with honey, she said instead of greeting me. There's no better remedy for anxious thoughts. We sat in her cozy kitchen and I told her everything. About Pamela's visit, about the fire, about their request. Agnes listened in silence, only occasionally nodding or raising her eyebrows. What did you decide? She asked me when I had finished. I don't know, I answered honestly. Part of me wants to help them. They are my daughter, my grandchildren after all. The other part remembers how easily they got rid of me when it suited them. Agnes stirred her tea thoughtfully with a spoon. There is a saying in my family. Before you forgive an enemy, make sure he is no longer an enemy. Your daughter and son-in-law have hurt you. The question is, have they learned a lesson from what happened? Have they changed? I'm not sure. I shook my head. Pamela looked scared, confused. But that could just be a reaction to the disaster, not real remorse. Then maybe we should give them a chance to prove they've changed. Agnes smiled. As for my permission, you know I trust your judgment. If you decide they can stay, I won't object. But, she raised a finger, only on your terms. You should be the mistress of the situation, not them. I went back to my apartment with a slightly lighter heart. Talking to Agnes had helped me to see the situation more clearly. It wasn't about whether Pamela and Winston deserved my help, probably not. It was about the kind of person I was, the values I practiced, the example I set for my grandchildren. Before I went to bed, I thought it over again and made a decision. I will help them, but on my terms. I will not slam the door in the face of a daughter in trouble, but I will not allow myself to be treated like a doormat again. I called Roger this morning. Grandma? He answered after the first beep, as if he'd been expecting my call. Mom said she was at your house yesterday. Yes, I confirmed. She told me about your situation. What did you decide? I could hear the hope in his voice. Honestly, Grandma, I don't know what we'll do if you say no. Dad has already called all his friends and coworkers, but no one can take in a family of 4 indefinitely. I'm not saying no, Roger, I said softly, but I have conditions. I want you to give them to the parents, okay? Of course. He sounded visibly relieved. What kind of conditions? First of all, it's a temporary solution, a month at the most until you find another option. Secondly, everyone must help around the house, cleaning, cooking, grocery shopping. And third, most importantly, I paused, no complaints, no disrespect. This is my house, my rules. If your parents agree to these terms, you can move in tomorrow. Thank you, grandmother, Roger exclaimed. I'm sure they'll agree. I'll tell them right away. As I hung up the phone, I looked at Herbert's picture on the dresser. What would he say about my decision? Would he approve, or would he think it was too soft? You were always the better of the two of us, Bea, I heard his voice say. More kind, more forgiving. Don't let bitterness change you. I spent the rest of the day preparing for my unexpected guests. I cleared out my closet, put some of my things in boxes under the bed, bought extra pillows and blankets, and stocked up on groceries. In the evening, as we'd agreed, Pamela showed up. She looked a little better this time, more neatly dressed, her hair styled. Her eyes were tense with anticipation. Roger gave me your terms, she said without preamble. We agree to everything. Thank you for not refusing us. I'm doing this primarily for Roger and Hazel, I answered honestly. They shouldn't have to suffer because of adult decisions. Pamela nodded, accepting my words. When can we move in? Tomorrow, I said. I'll make all the arrangements. But remember, Pamela, this is a temporary solution. I won't be able to put up with 4 people in such a small apartment for long. Of course, Mom. We understand. Thank you. We really do. When she left, I sat by the window again, looking out at the darkening sky. There was a strange peace inside. I didn't know if I'd made the right decision. Didn't know how things would turn out when Pamela and Winston moved into my tiny apartment. But I knew one thing. I had done what my heart told me to do. And no matter what happened next, I would live with a clear conscience. After all, as Herbert said, life is not what happens to us, but how we react to it. So I decided to react with dignity and grace, even if it meant letting those who had once kicked me out of mine into my home. The morning began with hassle and bustle. I got up earlier than usual, changed the bed with fresh linens, and put a final gloss on the apartment. Overnight, I realized that accommodating 4 people in my small attic was a nearly impossible task. But there was another problem, a deeper one. Yesterday, listening to Pamela, I realized that her remorse was not due to her wrongdoing, but only to the circumstances. Winston, on the other hand, as far as I knew his character, hardly thought he had done me wrong at all. By 8 o'clock, I had made up my mind. The apartment under Agnes's roof had become my refuge, my personal space, which I had created with my own hands after everything I had been through. I couldn't risk this fragile happiness, but I couldn't leave my family without help either. At 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I went downstairs and saw them all, Pamela, Winston, Roger, and Hazel, standing on the porch with suitcases and bags. There was a look of tense anticipation on the adults' faces and a mixture of hope and confusion on the children's faces. "Good morning," I said, ushering them into the hallway. "Before we go upstairs, there's something I'd like to discuss." Winston frowned but didn't say anything. Pamela looked at me questioningly. "I've been thinking about our situation all night," I began calmly, "and I've come to the conclusion that it would be unbearably cramped for all of us in my apartment. This is not a solution to the problem, but rather the creation of new ones." "We've already said we're prepared for the inconvenience," Winston interrupted me. "If it bothers you, it's not the inconvenience," I said firmly, looking him straight in the eye. "It's that some of the wounds haven't healed yet, and I'm not sure I'm ready to see the people who hurt me so much every day." Pamela turned pale. "What do you mean, Mom?" "I mean," I took a deep breath, "that I'm ready to host Roger and Hazel, but not you and Winston." There was a silence so deep you could hear the antique clock in Agnes's living room ticking. Winston was the first to break the silence. "Is this a joke?" His voice sounded incredulous with a note of indignation. "Are you suggesting splitting up the family?" "I'm suggesting a temporary solution," I replied calmly. "Roger and Hazel can stay with me while you and Pamela look for a suitable place for the whole family. You both work, you have incomes. You can afford to rent an apartment, however modest." This is unacceptable." Pamela shook her head. "We're a family. We have to be together." "Then you'll have to find another option," I said. "My apartment is too small for 4 people, much less 6, if you count me and Agnes, who lives 1 floor below and is very sensitive to noise." Hazel, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "I want to stay with my grandmother." Everyone turned to her. The 16-year-old girl stood straight with a determined expression on her face. "I'm sick of hotels and temporary shelters," she continued. "I want my own place, my own bed, my own table. I want to study for my exams in peace. And you and Dad are at work all day anyway." "Don't be silly," Pamela looked at her daughter sternly. "You're a minor, you'll live with us." "Actually," Roger intervened, "Hazel is right. She and I need stability. I'm graduating from college next semester. I need to focus on my studies. Grandma's place is quiet, peaceful, and close to the library. It's the perfect place to study." Winston and Pamela looked at each other. I could see the emotions in their eyes, changes of disbelief, indignation, confusion, and finally doubt. "Could we discuss this in private?" Winston finally asked. "Of course," I pointed to a small bench in the garden behind the house. "You can talk there." While they conferred, the children and I went up to my apartment. Hazel looked around curiously, touching the books on the shelves, looking at the pictures, studying the view from the window. "It's really nice here, Grandma," she said. "It's not like our old house." "I like it," Roger nodded, "especially those wooden beams on the ceiling." "Are they real?" "They are," I smiled. "The house is over 100 years old." 20 minutes later, Pamela and Winston returned. I could tell by the look on their faces that the decision had not been easy for them. "We agree," Pamela said, though it was clear from her tone that the agreement was forced. "But only on the condition that it's temporary. As soon as we find a suitable home, the children will come back to us." "Of course," I nodded. "And one more condition, you will participate in their maintenance. I'm not asking for much, but food, clothing, school expenses are your responsibility." "That goes without saying." Winston looked offended. "We're not going to put the care of our children on your shoulders." "Good." I allowed myself a slight smile. Then we had a deal. The rest of the day was spent settling in. Roger and I went to the hardware store and bought 2 cots. The chest of drawers was cleared for Hazel's things, and there was room for Roger in the closet. It was a little cramped, but it was bearable. Pamela and Winston left shortly after lunch, promising to call every day and visit the children as often as they could. I noticed a strange look of relief on Pamela's face as she said goodbye, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. That evening, as the 3 of us sat down to dinner, Hazel suddenly said, "You know, Grandma, Mom and Dad are actually glad you suggested this option. They just can't admit it." "What makes you think that?" I asked, pouring the tea. "Because they themselves are cramped in the hotel, they fight all the time," shrugged the girl. "After the fire, things got really bad. Dad blames Mom for insisting on a cheap crew of workers. Mom blames Dad for not checking their work. All in all, it's not much fun at home right now. I stayed silent, thinking about how often major disasters show cracks that already existed in a relationship. The fire hadn't created problems between Pamela and Winston, it had only made them visible. Their first week together was spent establishing new rules and habits. Roger left early in the morning for college and returned by evening. Hazel went to school nearby and after school often stopped by the library, where I continued to work 3 days a week. 10 days later, Pamela called. "We found an apartment," she said without preamble. "In a new complex on Oak Avenue." I whistled. Oak Avenue was one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Salem, with modern apartment buildings and everything from underground parking to a gym. "It must not be cheap," I remarked. "We can afford it," she said with a touch of irritation in her voice. "Winston got a raise after the promotion, remember?" "Of course," I agreed. "When are you moving in?" "We are. We signed the lease yesterday, moved in today. Why don't you and the kids come visit this weekend and check it out?" I extended the invitation to Roger and Hazel, but they weren't very enthusiastic. "I promised to help a classmate with a project," Roger said, still on his laptop. "And I have rehearsal for the school play," Hazel added, flipping through her textbook. "Maybe next time?" I didn't insist. Little by little, life was taking on a new direction. My grandchildren and I adapted to each other with unexpected ease. Roger turned out to be a neat and responsible young man, and Hazel, after initial wariness, revealed herself as an intelligent and sensitive girl. Pamela and Winston came every weekend, taking the children for the day or evening. But each time the children returned relieved, as if they had come back from an unpleasant obligatory trip. It had been a month since Roger and Hazel had moved in with me. One evening, there was a sudden ringing at the door. I went downstairs and saw Pamela, alone without Winston, wearing an elegant coat and carrying an expensive bag. No one would have guessed from her appearance that she had recently lost her home. "Mom, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "Alone." We went out to the cafe across the street. Pamela looked tense and nervous, twirling her coffee cup in her hands without taking a sip. "What's wrong?" I finally asked, tired of waiting for her to get her thoughts together. "We got the final report from the experts." She fixed a strand of hair. "The house is beyond repair. The foundation is damaged. The supporting structures are deformed because of the heat. It would be easier to tear it down and build again." "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "It's hard news." "Yes," she nodded. "But the insurance. The insurance company refuses to pay the full amount. They'll only cover 50% of the appraised value because of the irregularities in the repairs. That's not even enough to demolish and clear the site, let alone build new construction." I listened silently, beginning to guess where she was going with this. "Mom," Pamela finally looked me in the eye. "Winston and I were thinking, you have some savings, don't you? Dad's insurance, your pension fund. Maybe you could, lend you the money to build a new house?" I finished for her. "Not exactly." She shook her head. "More like invest. You could be part owner of the new house. Live there with us, like you used to." I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "Like before? You mean like the last few months before you kicked me out on the street when I felt unwanted in my own home?" Pamela blushed. "Mom, we all make mistakes. Winston and I were wrong to do that to you. But now we have a chance to make things right. A fresh start, a new home, a new relationship." "And if I say no?" I asked, looking at her closely. "What then?" "Then," she hesitated. "Then we'd have to sell the property. That money, along with the insurance, would be enough to pay off part of the mortgage we'd taken out for the renovation. But we'd still owe the bank." "And in that case, what will you do with Roger and Hazel?" "They'll come back to us, of course." Pamela straightened up. "As soon as we've sorted out the finances. The apartment on Oak Avenue is big enough for all of us." I leaned back in my chair contemplating the situation. So Pamela's asking me for help again. Not for temporary shelter this time, but for money, a substantial sum that makes up the bulk of my savings. And in return, she's asking me to return to the house they've so unceremoniously kicked me out of. "I'll think about it," I said at last. Please don't take too long to decide. Pamela glanced at her watch. The bank gives us 2 weeks to pay off the loan, or it will start foreclosure proceedings. At home, I found the children in the same posture. Roger at the computer, Hazel with a book. But the atmosphere had changed. They looked tense, worried. What did Mom want? Roger asked, closing the laptop. I told them about the conversation, holding nothing back. They listened attentively, occasionally glancing at each other. What did you decide? Hazel asked when I was done. Nothing yet, I answered honestly. It's a big decision, and I need to think it over. Grandmother, Roger came and sat down beside me. You mustn't feel obliged to help them. They are adults. They made their own decisions that led to this situation. 3 days later, I called Pamela and asked to meet. We met again at the cafe. This time, Pamela came with Winston. They sat across from me, both tense, waiting for my decision. I've given your proposal a lot of thought, I began, folding my hands on the table. I've come to the conclusion that I can't accept it. Winston's face darkened and Pamela pressed her lips together. Why not? Winston asked. If it's a matter of percentage of ownership, we're prepared to discuss terms. It's not about the percentage, I shook my head. It's that I've already given you everything I have once, and you showed me how little it meant to you. Mom, it was, Pamela began. A mistake? I interrupted her. That's what you said last time. But you know what amazes me? That in all these months, not one of you has apologized to me. Really, truly, sincerely. You talk about mistakes, about new beginnings, but never about how deeply you've hurt me. They were silent, avoiding looking me in the eye. I'm not investing in a new house, I continued. It's my turn to live for myself. I have a job I like, friends, hobbies. For the first time in years, I feel free and happy, and I'm not willing to give that up for the phantom hope that you'll suddenly learn to appreciate me and my sacrifices. What about the children? Pamela has gone on the offensive. Are you ready to give them up? Roger's 18. He's a grown man and decides where he wants to live, I replied calmly. As for Hazel, I'd be glad to have her stay with me until she comes of age. But if you insist on her coming back to you, I will not prevent it. It's up to you. Is that all? Winston looked disappointed and angry. You just refuse to help your own daughter? I'm helping her with the most valuable thing I have, my time, my care for her children, I said firmly. But my money is what I've earned, what I've put away for my old age, and I don't have to spend it on fixing your mistakes. Pamela looked like I'd slapped her. Winston started to say something, but she stopped him with a gesture. Okay, Mom, she said quietly. I understand your decision. We'll manage on our own. A week after our conversation, Pamela and Winston moved out of the expensive apartment on Oak Avenue and rented a 2-bedroom apartment in an ordinary neighborhood. They had put the Maple Street lot up for sale, along with plans for a new house they had ordered from an architect. Roger decided to stay with me until I graduated from college, and then he planned to rent his own place. Hazel, to my surprise, also chose to stay with her grandmother, arguing that it was more comfortable and convenient for her to study here. Pamela and Winston didn't object, perhaps realizing that a cramped apartment with parents in financial crisis is not the best place for an impressionable teenager. One warm May day, my grandchildren and I had a picnic in the city park. We spread a blanket under an old oak tree, laid out sandwiches, fruit, and homemade lemonade. Roger brought a frisbee, and we took turns throwing it to each other, laughing when we couldn't catch it. Grandma, Hazel lay back on the plaid, looking up at the sky through the branches of the oak tree. I've decided where I'm going to go after high school. Where? I asked, pouring lemonade into glasses. Art college. I want to study photography and design. As I looked at my grandchildren, I thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought us to this moment. The fire that robbed my family of their home ended up giving me a new family, not by blood, but by choice. Roger and Hazel chose to be with me when they could go back to their parents. They saw me not just as a grandmother to be tolerated out of obligation, but as someone they wanted to share their lives with. And that, perhaps, is the essence of a real family, not a common roof over our heads, not formal obligations, but the choice to be together, to support each other, to appreciate what each brings to the common life. My grandchildren and I found that, a real, deep connection based on mutual respect and love. And it was more precious than any house, any material values.